Hello, I'm Ginny Butera, and welcome to Butera Art Talks. It's a series that I do from time to time where I interview artists whose work I really love. Today I'm speaking with Kiyomi Baird. I had a wonderful opportunity to meet Kiyomi when I decided to include her work in an exhibition that I was working on. We had a great studio visit. I looked at all her wonderful photographs, collages, paintings that she did, particularly those with a full moon. And don't you know that after we came out of her studio, there was this gorgeous moon above us. And I realized that we had cemented a friendship, and also I could see where she had gotten a lot of her imagery. So Kiyomi, tell me a little bit about your background, because your work is very varied and I'm fascinated with how you became an artist and why and when.
Well, I think it all started when I was about 3. My father gave me one of these incredible sets with all the different artist utensils and colors and so on. And we made a daily ritual of creating art. And it sort of made our life creative in a meaningful way. And his background was, he did Japanese brush paintings and photography. So that kind of inspired me to just do things with him. And that's where it started. And then I continued going to school in California, and then in Germany, and eventually I had the opportunity to go with my husband to Tokyo, Japan, and that was quite an interesting experience because I am 3rd generation Japanese. However, I didn't have the language and I didn't have the cultural background, so it was quite a foreign kind of experience for me. However, what was interesting was that I found, surprisingly, many aspects of their culture that really resonated within me. And I've kind of got in touch with sort of the DNA that I was carrying around with me and I had no idea of until that time. So that brought me to incorporating a lot of the sort of allowing that to happen and then recognizing the East-West kind of experience I had. And maybe that's why you see so many different kinds of work, because it's pretty much when I'm working, it's like straddling the line. Sometimes I lean this way, sometimes I lean this way, and it's East and West. And sometimes I'm kind of right there in the center.
So did your father bring the Asian influence initially into your work, or were you living in California when you were young?
Right.
And then, I mean, that has its own landscape and wonderful atmosphere, but it seems as though it was Japan that really triggered your imagery.
Japan really triggered my imagery because at home, he was doing photography and other things, and I had no identity that it was this or that, no recognition that it was this or that. It's only when I was in Japan that I recognized it was a real different culture, and then beginning to learn those parts of the culture that actually I felt, and it was like, oh.
They were internal things.
Yes, it was really an internal thing, and it was a big surprise, it really was.
So, can you give me an idea, though, about the techniques that you began to develop when you were in Japan? Are they different than the ones that you had used earlier, or did they continue things that your father taught you and you learned elsewhere along the way?
I had learned the traditional techniques of art when I was in California, and when I was in Japan, I did learn some very interesting technique. It's called Nihonga, way of painting. And what it is using pigment and glue. And it's then applied to mulberry paper, the very thick fibrous ones. This is what they make the screens out of, which they did many centuries ago. And working that way. And so I started to do work in that way, and then returning, I added on some of my own Western ideas. So actually the technique, the actual technique of some of my work is what I call sort of fusion media, because it starts out using the traditional Japanese, ends up with Western type of.
So is this why there's so much texture and wonderful qualities to the surface of your paintings and so forth? This, what did you call it? A Hinonga technique? Nihonga technique.
Partly that's because it is the way I work in the media Nihonga and then the Western fusion type. But going back a little further is that I've always been very excited about texture and patterns. And so this technique allowed me to start layering that. And so there's a depth. And I love the depth because I want to be able to move into that two-dimensional flat space that's there. And so this is true, that I really am into the texture.
So I noticed that you've used a lot of circular forms in your work. It's one of the things that I'm most drawn to your pieces. Are these planetary moon shapes, that wonderful moon that we saw when we first met, are they about the universe? Are they about spirituality? Could you tell me a little bit about your subject matter?
Well, first let me say the moon or the circular form in my work just happens. And that circular form as a form represents to me no beginning, no ending. It is a symbol of infinity, an infinite or eternal kind of form. And it also appears in my work by itself and has for some years now. I try to work without it or whatever, but the way I work is that I am inspired by all people and experiences. It's like breathing in. And when I go to work on a blank canvas, I have no idea what's going to happen. But that white canvas is so exciting. I just want to, and I exhale. And sometimes circles appear, and most times it just happens. And so what can I say? It seems to be a symbol of balance. It seems to be a need for harmony and balance, maybe because of my east-west kind of tension. Whatever it is, I just allow it to be and accept it as what it is.
So one of the other things that I'm interested in, the circle appears, but it comes up in your work with photography as well, and your collage work, and I'm wondering, is that because in the photograms you've put circular objects in there, or are you playing in a different way when you make different kinds of work with different techniques?
You know, that's really an interesting question, because I never even thought about that when I moved from one technique to another. And yes, it would seem that in a photogram that I would have to have thought about it, but you know, I think that I just automatically pick up round objects and put them there without even thinking. It just happens. What can I say? You know, art just happens if we allow it.
I've been so privileged to be talking with Kiyomi Baird today. Kiyomi, I want to thank you so much for answering all my interested questions about your work. It's been a pleasure getting to know Kiyomi, and I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you so much, Kiyomi, and thank you for having us today.